Welcome, everyone, to the newly rebooted DOA podcast with opinion columnist Jeff Ward. Of course, DOA stands for Decisions, Opinions, and Analysis. I mean, what else could it possibly stand for? It's good to be back on the air, so to speak. In that regard, I want to thank my publisher and good friend, Paul Stukel, for encouraging me to start this process up again. I do enjoy it. I do enjoy the feedback. I do enjoy my listeners. And as my longtime readers know, I do also enjoy sharing my opinion. And speaking of Paul Stukel, we're going to get him on the show because Paul and I have some of the best philosophical debates between any two individuals on this vast third rock from the sun. And these are epic conversations. Sometimes we agree, sometimes we disagree. But whenever we expound upon an issue of great import, there is no stone left unturned. In addition to Paul, we're going to get my good friend and the attorney who keeps me out of jail, Jeff Meyer, back on. Of course, that's no small Herculean task. Jeff and I will probably get back to our Sunday evenings with Jeff and Jeff, pull up a glass of wine, plop down on the easy chair, put the headphones on, and listen to us set everything straight that needs to be set straight. And right now, there's a lot that needs to be set straight. We're also going to get my good friend Kate Coxworth on. Kate is the amazing young woman who, after sending me a funny email, as a result of which I explained the best way to get Geneva kids back in school as the epidemic was waning, she managed to do just that in 30 short days. I've never had a reader seek my advice and run with it so quickly. And let me tell you, that's something I could get used to. Kate and I have since become good friends. If you hear me use the term, the general sweaty public, that comes straight from Kate. And she's got some fascinating viewpoints. Of course, she and I agree more often than not. But the hook there is there's a female that agrees with what some folks think are my not so liberal points of view. We're also going to get my good friend Jessica Brueggemans on. If you recall, Jessica ran for Geneva's school board some years ago. She ran a great race. I helped her out, but the union candidates flooded the city with mailers, and she came in a close fifth place, which put her just out of the running. She has since been asked to come on the board, but having realized what that kind of thing entails, she's not foolish enough to take anyone up on that. But Jessica is the person I turn to whenever I can't quite figure something out. And she was instrumental in some of the passages of Diary of a Curmudgeon, my impending second book. So we're going to get Jessica on to talk about those issues to which she's particularly attuned to. The other thing I want to do a lot more of is a few more monologues based on my, twice weekly columns. It's taken some practice to get good at that. I mean, after the 5 years I did on WRMN, most of them with Larry Jones, my co-host, it's one thing to have a co-host to play off of. It's another thing entirely to sit in your home office and speak to no one in particular. Now, what I have discovered is when I do my regular 8:35 a.m. Thursday morning WRMN news updates for whatever I've been writing about that week, the fact that I'm talking to Mark Bialek makes it much easier to do so. So here's what I want you to imagine. I'm sitting here in my home office with my Wilson Castaway volleyball. So just like Tom Hanks in the movie, I'm talking to Wilson, who, as it turns out, is a great listener. And don't we all need someone who really listens to us in our lives? I got to tell you, he's great. So the DOA podcast is back. I'm thrilled to be back. And today we are going to talk about something I thought I would never have to talk about in my lifetime. And I've lived through quite a bit as a child of the 60s. We're going to talk about kind of LGBTQ plus bigotry that would ban uniformed gay officers from marching in the Aurora Pride Parade. I got to tell you, I never thought I'd see the day. And had you told me 10 years ago that this would be the 2022 case after a pandemic where we were all separated from each other for so long, I would have sought out your significant other sign the paperwork and have you committed. But here we are. And it's insane. On the one hand, I'm thrilled I always have something to write on or expound about. But on the other, I never thought I would have to talk about LGBTQ plus tyranny. And it's the worst kind of tyranny. Well, maybe not the worst. But when you consider that those folks really ought to know better because they've been the recipient of some of the worst kind of prejudice and intolerance, it makes it far less palatable when they're the purveyors of that kind of thing. But before we get into the Aurora Pride Parade, heart of the matter, I want to harken back to my May 26th column on Ludwig the dog. I'm sure most of you have already heard about, Ludwig the dog. He escaped the confines of his Wayne, Illinois backyard for a second time, attacked a neighbor. The neighbor happened to be Hal Phipps, the husband of Wayne Village President Elaine Phipps. A second time, Phipps pulled out a handgun and shot him. It was a dick move. And I mean, I've been assaulted by dogs on my road bike, on my property, and I've always managed to find a way to deal with it, whether it's Kane County Animal Control or, being bigger and badder than the dog is. But I've never even had to resort to pepper spray. But the fact of the matter is, if you're attacked by a dog on your property, and it's just the first time, the law affords you every right to protect yourself. And that's what Phipps did. So whether his actions were moral is one issue, whether they were legal is another, and they absolutely were. And that column generally went after Kane County State's Attorney Jamie Mosser for after having made the correct decision. There's video evidence, there's eyewitness evidence. There was a pending charge against this dog owner. I mean, Joe Pettit, the owner of Ludwig, shouldn't be allowed to own a goldfish, much less, a dog of any nature. And the issue there is Mosser couldn't take the heat from the Ludwig loonies, as I affectionately call them, who have been applying pressure because they think the fix was in. They think that somehow the husband of the Wayne Village president has the kind of clout that would make two of the highest paid elected officials in Kane County risk their entire career to let him off the hook. And regardless of the video evidence that shows dogs going across the river and then only one dog coming back, apparently the Phipps yard and Pettit's yard abut each other across the Fox River. Despite eyewitness testimony, despite a previous incident, you cannot convince folks what are facts and what aren't facts. And in fact, their facts tend to get as fluid as whatever makes them feel good at the time. It's this new progressive notion that, we can't have valedictorians. We have to have participation trophies. We shouldn't grade homework. Nobody should get picked last for dodgeball. And I can no entrance exams at Illinois universities. And I can go on. And it's this notion that if we can't or don't or refuse to protect our progeny and our fellow man from just a nanosecond of emotional unrest, we have failed as a society. Because if we adhere to progressive stilted notion of what reality should be, everyone will clearly be happy all the time, because that's the way life is, right? There's no letdowns. There's no depression. We don't stub our toes. I mean, everything can be perfect. But come on, we all know that's not going to be the case. As Inspector Clouseau would say, kind of the ups and downs of life it's all part of life's rich pageant. That's a little redundant, but I think you get what I'm trying to say. You can't shield people from emotional hurt. And it would be patronizing and absurd to do it, because that's the only way we tend to grow. If we don't learn from this existence, and I think that's why we're all here, what's the point? So, in regards to Ludwig the dog, and I wish Ludwig was still alive. Don't get me wrong. It's a matter of the legality. But the shit people made up to avoid the emotional hurt of realizing that the pet owner was in the wrong here. Because if Joe Pettit, a real piece of work, if Joe Pettit took care of his dog, learned from his first escape and attack or alleged attack that was headed to court, none of this would have happened. That's the reality. Responsible pet owners, do my dogs get out? Of course they do. But I keep it to an absolute minimum because I know what can happen if they get out. They're nice dogs, but not everybody knows that. And you never know what could set a rescue dog off. You think you know them, but you're never really sure because you don't know the life they lived before they came to you. But people saying that Hal Phipps shot across his entire yard into the river, nobody's that good with a handgun, not even police officers. Some people said he went in to get the gun and came back out. No, he didn't. He was carrying the gun on him, likely as a result of the first attack. I mean, and these bizarre pronouncements that had no basis in reality to justify a viewpoint that has no basis in the law just because people don't want to feel bad is the kind of phenomenon I never thought I'd see growing up in 1960s Evanston. Come on, despite our best efforts, we're not going to feel good all the time. And it would probably lead to some sort of psychotic break if we did. All right. With that explanation out of the way, let's move on to the Aurora Pride Parade. The Aurora Pride Parade has been going on since 2018. It took a couple of years off for the pandemic. But, Mayor Irvin, a man I got elected, which I will regret to my dying day. It's one of the few things he's done right. It's been a great celebration. He's marched in it. Gay Aurora police officers have marched in it. Former police chief Kristen Zeman was unabashedly gay, as every gay person should be. Aurora was one of the first cities to appoint an LGBTQ liaison. I believe that officer's name is Sergeant Lee Katavu. He himself is gay. But this year, out of the blue, after no issues, no problems for the first two marches, the Pride Parade organizers unilaterally decided that uniformed officers were banned from this year's event. And I mean, to say I'm incredulous, I'd say I'm at a loss for words, but clearly I'm not. It's only likely because I'm an opinion columnist. But the very people who are angling for tolerance, acceptance, inclusivity, and diversity have become the very tyrants they like to rail against, and they correctly rail against them. So I'm sorry for stuttering and stammering a little bit. I'm quite the professional, but I am absolutely baffled at this possibility. I mean, what the parade organizers said in a statement is, many members of the community feel uneasy in the presence of official law enforcement vehicles, as well as uniformed officers, due to negative experiences they themselves or someone they know have had. Again, it gets back to this feeling uneasy. We've got to be happy all the time. We can't grow. We need our safe spaces. And as I wrote in the column, apparently these parade organizers have never been to a Village People concert. I mean... And then there's I need to come up with a word when something is so ironic, the word ironic doesn't work. And I'm not too sure what that word would be. What, disingenuously ironic? Ironic, exponentially ironic? I'm not quite sure what that word would be. But the vast irony here is, while they've banned uniform officers from the parade and official police vehicles, they have absolutely no problem with the fact that the parade route is going to be lined with uniformed and armed officers in or nearby their official vehicles to ensure the public safety. I don't know, perhaps all LGBTQ people have a severe case of myopia and they simply won't see them. But I can't begin to get this level of bigotry and tyranny on the part of folks who've had to endure the worst of it for so many years. It is beyond It is beyond baffling. Again, Richard Irvin, the mayor of Aurora, Richard Irvin, the mayor of Aurora, who's currently running for governor, I should add, tends to hold political expedience above everything else. But in this case, he did the right thing. He said, A, I'm not going to march in the parade. B, we're going to pull the city's float from the parade. And what was Aurora Pride's reaction to these keen perception of the obvious folks? I'm sure you've already guessed it. To quote, the APD is absolutely ahead of many other departments, but there's still work to be done. Really? So we can't acknowledge vast progress until everything's perfect. We can't acknowledge a group really trying to change the paradigm until we've hit that platonic ideal. My God. And these are people who've endured some of the worst bigotry on the planet actually saying this. I keep saying it's baffling. I keep stuttering a little bit, but I'm not quite sure what else to do. Apparently, in Aurora Pride's world, gay bars are still being raided. Gay folks still can't get married. And there's a plethora of them who have no choice but to remain in the closet. I mean, it's such abject bullshit to try to equate 2022 with even the year 2000. We have made immense progress. Is it perfect? Of course not. Anything that involves human beings is never going to be perfect. Just go on social media. That's all the evidence you really need there. I'm just going to keep on saying it. There's no bigotry like minority bigotry. The sad thing is when people who have been denied power for so long finally get it, inevitably, the first thing they do is become far worse than the people they've loathed for so long. It's human nature. And the irony there is critical race theory is right in its purest form. Whoever has the power seems to thrust their inherent biases on everyone else. That's all it is. It's only after college professors got a hold of CRT that it turned into white original sin. But what really frosts my flakes here is the Aurora Pride folks had yet another chance to prove they could rise above what other folks haven't risen above in regard to them. They've already let the officers march in uniform with their official cars, with their sidearms in previous parades. And that sends a message that, yes, we may be a little uncomfortable for this, for a series of events that anybody would be uncomfortable about, but we're going to set the example by embracing everyone. We're going to set the example for what we've been denied. I realize everyone can't be Nelson Mandela and embrace their oppressors, but it's not as if Aurora officers hadn't previously marched in the parade. It's not as if this was a problem before. And even after this exclusionary tactic, the LGBTQ community will be the first ones to scream bloody murder whenever they're denied a wedding cake at a bakery. And while I agree with it, the truth is the LGBT community, who really haven't spoken up about this, what a shock, I suppose, are setting a truly dangerous precedent, because the reason these bakeries and other businesses have previously decided not to deal with their community is because some people are uncomfortable. And come on, if you've been brought up in Christian households, if you haven't been exposed to gay folks very much, it can be a rather daunting proposition. We're all products of our initial environment. Bill Burr does a joke about, haven't you ever asked your grandmother a question and she suddenly went down this strange track and you're like, whoa, okay, grandma, okay. My great aunt and my grandmother were incredible people, but they couldn't let go of the racism they were raised by. They couldn't let go of those terrible words. So what were my options? To cut them loose for a very minor part of their lives, which I disagreed with, or to try to avoid those topics and move forward with the best relationship I could. And it's the same thing here. Because if we apply or the Aurora Pride folks, and my understanding is Chicago's going to do the same thing with their Pride Parade. If we apply the same logic, then why can't, white straight folks who are uncomfortable with the thought of the LGBTQ community, and it is kind of a different thought. It truly is. We could barely handle our own sexuality, much less something slightly different. But now where do they go if a group says, you know what? We want our event to be as inclusive as possible, so we're going to ban gays. It would be a terrible thing. I hope it doesn't happen, but that's exactly what the Aurora Pride folks are saying. And again, where's the outcry from the LGBT community who has to realize this is the absolute wrong thing to do? I mean, the irony of that is almost too much to bear. So in addition to aggravating everyone they possibly could, these Pride Parade nitwits have set one of the most counterproductive precedents I've ever seen. How could they possibly say it is the organization's responsibility to provide the most welcoming environment possible for the largest number of participants we can with a straight face? Pun intended, is beyond me, because they are saying it with a straight face. They're saying exactly what straight folks said about them for decades. And again, the silence from the LGBTQ community at large is abundantly depressing, because all it says is that bigotry, intolerance, and tyranny are okay as long as they're the perpetrators. Truth is so much stranger than fiction, folks. So since the Aurora Pride folks are clearly unable or unwilling to change their minds, here's my fondest wish. My wish is that the fine people of Aurora will avoid or boycott, whichever word you want, the Pride Parade on June 12th, just as if they boycott any event that was sponsored by the Ku Klux Klan, the Proud Boys, neo-Nazis, or Westboro Baptist Church. And I'm saying this because if intolerance is wrong, then it doesn't matter what form it comes in, it must be denounced. It must not be allowed to stand. So there you go. I never thought I'd have to issue a column or a podcast on a subject like this, but it's 2022. Apparently, the stupidity epidemic that's followed COVID is so much worse than the pandemic. I don't know how to, I don't know why it's happening. I don't know how to explain it, but it clearly is, because in my 63 long years on this planet, I never thought I'd run into or have to write about the kind of stuff I've had to in 2022. I thought we were past so much of this, but apparently we aren't. So that wraps up this first reboot episode of the DOA podcast. Again, DOA stands for Decisions, Opinions, and Analysis. I am opinion columnist Jeff Ward. I want to thank you for listening. I want to thank you for being a part of the conversation, because if you weren't reading or you weren't listening, I wouldn't be doing this. There'd be no point. And speaking of continuing the conversation, you can certainly reach out to me on Facebook. You can make comments on the blog, thefirstward.net, all spelled out. You can email me at Jeff N, as in Noel Ward, at Comcast.net. I am abundantly easy to reach. My plan is for the follow-up podcast to include my thoughts on the Johnny Depp Amber Heard trial, because nobody's getting that thing right. I really wanted to avoid something so non-local, but there are times one must address it and bring balance to the force, and this is certainly one of those occasions. I look forward to talking with you then. Hey, this is Jeff Ward, and I'm back with the DOA First. And that first this is an addendum to the Aurora Pride Parade podcast that you likely just finished listening to. It would seem the playing field has changed a little bit, because less than a week before the event, the Pride folks could not come up with the number of officers required statutorily by the city of Aurora to pull off an event of this size. They need at least 67 to 70 officers to ensure the public safety, and they've only managed to acquire somewhere around 47. So since they did not live up to their responsibilities, the city of Aurora withdrew their permit. And those Pride folks are appealing this. Well, actually, they're awaiting the decision of their appeal as we speak. But who knew that if you banned uniformed officers, sidearms, and official police vehicles from an event, that you might not be able to encourage or entice enough officers to volunteer for the event such that your event won't take place. Every time I think I've seen the epitome of irony, dear listeners, I am rapidly and summarily proven dead wrong. Although I'm happy to say this kind of consequenceless thinking is a truly bipartisan effort. It occurs with alarming frequency on both ends of the political spectrum. And I want to say the far right and the far left, but that's not the case anymore. The semi-far right and the somewhat far left so fervently believe that they're right about anything and everything that there will never be any consequences for their actions. They can't conceive of a possibility where someone might think they're wrong. And when you ban police officers from an event and you need at least 70 of them to pull the event off, that's probably going to turn out to be a really bad idea. And apparently the Pride organizers have, they've searched high and low to find 20 officers in Aurora, in other jurisdictions, but they have been completely rebuffed and have essentially given up on the notion, which is probably a good idea because when you've angered every police department within the sound of your voice, things probably aren't going to go your way. But just when you thought things couldn't get any crazier, particularly on the part of the Pride folks, now that their parade is in doubt, they are threatening to sue the city because it is a constitutional violation not to have Aurora police officers show up. And that might be true for a city-sponsored event, but all Pride parades, well, I better be careful about that, but this particular Pride parade is a private event. It's put on by an organization that has no direct ties to the city of Aurora. They have to fill out forms, get permits, the whole 9 yards. So no police officer, Aurora or otherwise, is under any requirement to work an event on their private time. They choose to work that overtime. They choose to, they're the ones who get to choose whether they work overtime or not the city, not the Pride people. And they can bring in the Pride people, that is the ACLU. They can sue to their heart's content, but it's not going to change a damn thing. Worse yet, utterly undaunted by their exclusive ways, their intolerance, their bigotry, the Pride people put a post on their webpage essentially saying, our position has been misrepresented. Misrepresented how? Somebody put a gun to your head and made you ban police officers? There was a typo in your press release? How was the fact that they banned uniformed police officers and official police vehicles from their event to celebrate inclusivity and tolerance and diversity, of course, how could that possibly be misinterpreted? Or in their words, misrepresented? I got to tell you, I'm getting the biggest kick out of this because it's so much fun to cover. It's so much fun watching a minority group squirm under the microscope of bigotry. It's so much fun knowing that police waited till essentially the last minute to, serve their karma, a dish best served cold. And it's hilarious watching the Pride Parade folks scurry and still, scurry to try to make this work, still in no way understanding that they've been hoisted by their own petard. And there's no other way to put this. They set this up, and now they're reaping what they sowed, and they don't like it. The ruling just came in, and it was indeed a city magistrate or a city administrative judge. It was not a 16th Circuit court judge who made the decision, and he upheld the revocation of the permit because, again, the law requires that they have, as it turns out, the law required they needed 57 officers to monitor and marshal the parade, and they only managed to get 37. Again, what a shock. Ban gay officers from marching in uniform in the parade. And then why would anybody be surprised when those officers won't volunteer their private time to work overtime at the event? But having learned absolutely nothing from this debacle, now the Aurora Pride folks are saying that they are going to sue the city in federal court. The smarter move, although it wouldn't work either, would be to file a lawsuit in the 16th Circuit, which could get heard far more quickly on an emergency basis. 16th Circuit is Kane County, of course. But even that would fail because that would go before Judge Kevin Bush, and he would uphold the law as it's written. Everybody who comes to Aurora with a certain tier event like ABCD, and this is a top tier event, has to procure the appropriate number of officers to safely hold the event. Nobody's being discriminated against. So, and federal court, there's no way they're going to hear this case in time for the parade to go on. So in one of the most marvelous cases of irony to which I've ever borne witness, because the Pride Parade organizers were intolerant, bigoted, and divisive by excluding gay officers in uniform, their event is now canceled. Or put more simply, the cancel culture just got canceled. And I'd like to think that they'd learn from this strange but hilarious turn of events and become better people. Certainly they had no problem with uniformed officers marching in the 2018 and 19 parades. But no, they haven't learned anything. They're going to further aggravate the city, making it even more difficult to get a permit and the required number of officers next year. I am sure the firstward.net, the actual blog, I'm sure I'll be covering it here as well. I will continue to cover this fascinating process. Please stick with me. And thank you for listening to this addendum as I attempt to keep up with the news as quickly as possible. As I always like to end these things with, let's continue the conversation.